Welcome to the Corporate Learning Network's Roundtable Measuring Knowledge Investment. Last fall, we surveyed dozens of learning and development leaders on everything from where they're investing their L&D budgets to what they see as the future of the Learning and Development Department as part of our first ever benchmarking report. A few weeks ago, we released that report. You can download your own copy by clicking the link, which you'll find in the description for this video below. Today we've assembled a panel of 3 L&D experts who are also quoted as thought leaders in this year's benchmarking report. Before we get started with introductions to our panelists, I just want to note that many of the topics we're covering in today's roundtable will also be discussed in person at our upcoming event, Corporate Learning Week West, happening May 19th through the 22nd in San Jose, California. Now for today's panelists. First, we have Patrick Conway, who's the Chief Knowledge Officer at the U.S. Army's Combined Arms Support Command. Patrick, welcome.
Thank you, Jeff. Glad to be here.
Great to have you too, Patrick. Next, we have Beth Gates, Director of Global Training at Philips Healthcare. Hi, Beth.
Hi, Jeff.
And finally, we have Blake Melnick, Chief Knowledge Officer at the Knowledge Management Institute of Canada. Welcome, Blake.
Thank you, Jeff. Pleasure to be here.
Great. Yeah, let's get right into it. Let's dive right in. Perhaps one of the most exciting findings from this year's report is learning is hot again. More than half of our survey respondents projected an increase in the spending of their L&D budgets for 2014. And actually, 1 of every 6 respondents projected an increase of more than 10% compared with 2013. So I want to just throw this to the floor, guys. Is this something you're seeing right now on the ground? Patrick, I'd like to start with you. I think you can offer us a government perspective on this issue.
I think more of our focus in the construct of being more efficient with the use of our resources is focusing on increasing our efforts in maximizing efficiencies garnered through learning and development and all the accoutrements therein, and focusing it on the effect that learning has on our productivity, but not necessarily requiring an increase in funding, and 2, making sure that what we focus on has got the effect that we desire. So I think that's what we're finding our major efforts on at my level.
Great. How about you, Beth? Can you offer us a perspective of where L&D budgets are headed in the corporate world?
Yeah, we are similar to Patrick. We're finding that we're being asked to do more with less, more with less people, if you will. And we're being asked to invest in infrastructure and tooling to be more effective, but have less L&D staff. So it's a change in investment, and it's also we are increasing our spending in infrastructure and in tooling, and even ready content that is out there that we can utilize and distribute instead of creating a lot of that in-house. So it's being efficient, but we are and being lean, but it's investing in the places where we need to invest, like infrastructure and tooling.
And how about you, Blake? I know in your role you have the opportunity to work with lots of different L&D departments. So is this increase in spending, is this a trend we're seeing, or you're seeing, I should say, across the board?
Well, I actually see, quite positively, I see companies spending more on training and development. I think there's a, I guess this ties into the knowledge management discipline somewhat, but I see corporations recognizing the value of knowledge as their commodity in order to outstrip the competition, to be faster, more efficient, more effective. And I see it, particularly in industries, highly technical industries, oil and gas, energy of all kinds, that there is a real refocusing on training and much more emphasis being placed there. Now, I would also say, though, they're struggling with the trying to embed learning with work. So right now, I still see a massive separation between learning and the actual work of the organizations.
So yeah, let's talk about some of the specifics of that spending. In our benchmarking report, Classroom Learning Top Spending Expenditures, among learning and development departments, but blended models are also emerging in popularity. So we all know there are lots of innovative approaches to learning and development. I want to ask you all, what are the approaches that you're most excited about? Beth, how about we start with you? I think you can offer us the perspective of a global training as you do at a major international corporation.
For us, classroom training is we're spending less on classroom training. Blended learning is huge. Everything from integrating social learning within where we're housing content and distributing content. We're doing more video, more rapid learning, and we're really excited about the 70-20-10 learning and development model. Phillips is all of its investments, whether it's infrastructure, tooling, content, it is all headed towards supporting this model. So we're investing in areas where we can support our learners during informal learning as much, if not more, than the formal learning traditional classroom. So we're supporting, informal learning is being supported through mentorships, programs like job shadows. Our managers are implementing the 70-20-10 model through development plans. And we've invested heavily in social learning and communities of practice as well. Formal learning is still important, so we're still going to invest in classroom training, but we're more careful in our planning of formal learning and formal training, so that is what is learned in the classroom is applied directly to the job. But we're also excited about empowering our subject matter experts that are on the field, in the ground, with the tools and the networks to share their knowledge as well.
Blake, how about you? Beth mentioned informal learning, and we've also been talking about classroom training, blended learning. So how are you seeing the breakdown in terms of percentages, perhaps, in your work with L&D departments?
Well, as the report suggests, I mean, I still see an emphasis on face-to-face classroom training. However, blended learning is starting to grow. And what really excites me is a couple of things, and Beth kind of touched on it with their example of translating field experience right into the classroom. So I'm starting to see a lot of organizations that are using some pretty advanced level technology to capture instances, maybe their faults, maybe their failures in the field, and translating those almost dynamically right back to the classroom so that the people in the classroom are actually working on the same problems and challenges as their counterparts in the field. So that really excites me. I also see corporations moving to developing or using handheld technology. So as part of their sort of handheld strategies, because everybody's realized that that's where things are going in the future, I'm starting to see some really cool and interesting stuff utilizing handheld technologies, particularly in the area of assessment and feedback mechanisms during both face-to-face and blended learning programs.
Patrick, I know we talked about this topic before, actually, at Corporate Learning Week in November, and you mentioned kind of what Blake was talking about, the importance of things that are accessible on demand and accessible mobily. So how does that compare with your spending on something like, say, classroom training?
Yeah, I think what I would have to say on that, Jeff, is very similar to what Blake and Peggy have talked about, and that is the fact that for us, we had to go back and kind of relook from its fundamental terms what learning is. And based on that, our look at learning, our fundamental definition of learning is a change in behavior or cognitive understanding. The next step was to then turn around and say, well, how many different ways does that occur? And how many different avenues or approaches can we take to optimize learning in that context? And in many of the studies we use as a premise to that are clearly indicated, and I think the last one that I read, that 80% of our learning in the workforce takes place on the job. Mm-hmm. So our approach was in a blended learning sense, if you will. How many different ways can we leverage and couple on-the-job learning, learning at the point of need, experiential learning, with our blended learning strategy, and how many different techniques and technologies and methods, I want to be careful here not to misconstrue technology with methods, can we tap into that and make our learning environment a ubiquitous environment whereby learning takes place all the time, and learning takes place as we perhaps get together a small team to work on a project, or a virtual team that works through communities of practice, or through mobile apps, or through some other method. The differences today are there are so many different knowledge sharing environments and pipelines, if you will. So why not tap into them and establish some type of learning agility that best meets the needs? And that's kind of our blended learning strategy. So I will tell you that classroom is not to say that classroom is not important, nor is it to say that that the investment therein isn't just as important, but also the investment in some of these other avenues has got to catch up with the classroom instruction. And for our instructors, as an example, they move from a sage on the stage to learning facilitators or guides on the side. And each of us in different agencies and organizations are responsible for the learning and professional development of our employees anyway. So why not tap into that same stream, if you will?
Yeah, definitely. Sort of along those lines, one thing that always comes to mind when we're exploring new things in the L&D realm is the need for metrics and ROI. And that's what I'd like to go into next. A major topic of our report was measuring knowledge investment, hence the report's name. And the L&D leaders that we surveyed talked about the importance of showing the return on investment of their learning and development programs. But that can be difficult for things that are, as we're talking about, happening on the job, things that you may not always capture or be able to measure. So what approaches have you all seen or used to measure knowledge and then in turn show your department's worth or need to see levels in your company? So Beth, how about we start with you?
Sure. Yeah. Well, this is a huge topic, and this, it's a huge subject. And the measuring science or measuring knowledge is a science. There's so many factors that could just disrupt the measure: gender bias, motivation, design of the instrument itself. But we do our best. We do our best through methods such as direct observation, which I think is one that we use more often with the informal programs like Job Shadow and mentorship. Self-assessment is becoming something that we're using more often as well. In training exams, which is some of the traditional means, and also simulation assessments. In my business, we work with clinicians, and we work with those who train clinicians on medical devices. So in these sensitive areas where you cannot have a lot of direct observation without a lot of risk, and Patrick may have something similar, we have to put people in simulated environments to observe as well. So simulation assessments seem to be something that we're using a lot more as well. And in all cases, I don't think we're going to be able to measure our entire knowledge investment, but those are some tools that we're using to do our best.
How about you, Blake? What are you seeing as the ways people are measuring knowledge investment?
Well, I'll talk about it in two perspectives. One is focusing in on the ROI point. What I'm seeing now, which is, I think, super interesting, is that organizations are taking a renewed look or a different look at the value proposition. So typically an organization, a traditional organization looks at value based on what hits the balance sheet, in other words, the bottom line. What I'm seeing now is actually organizations thinking about capital and value quite differently. So they're actually including, in terms of the value of what's being done within an organization, they're including intellectual capital, human capital, intellectual property, relationship capital. So all of these now sort of have it's much easier now to measure the impact of effective training and learning when you're looking at a much broader perspective of value. So what I'm seeing in terms of translating the learning in the classroom to the work in the field is that they're looking at metrics, that impact the business. So, for example, they may be looking at metrics like customer satisfaction, or they may be looking at on-time, on-budget delivery of programs, or they may be, looking at greater throughput of students. So there's that kind of sort of big picture view now on impact through training and learning and knowledge. And then within the classroom structure itself, I think sort of picking up on what Beth said, this notion of learning and applying that learning almost immediately, and whether you use a form of simulation to do that, I've seen that done quite effectively, but it's basically getting students to demonstrate that they're actually understanding the content by actually creating a context from which to apply it. If they can't demonstrate that that they actually understand the content, then they're put back in a remediation loop, and they go back and they focus on only that element where they seem to lack a connection or an understanding. So assessment, in terms of in online environments and things like that, are becoming far more focused. So we're not doing the old thing of putting somebody through a whole series of training units only, and then do some summative evaluation at the end, only to find out that they can't meet the performance criteria, and putting them back through the whole thing again.
And Patrick, how about you? What are you seeing as the approaches and best practices for showing ROI of your learning and development programs?
We're about performing and producing and achieving the outcomes embedded within our strategic plan and strategy, and hitting on those priorities. So as opposed to an individual objective for learning, the corporate approach that we're after is to tie learning and development directly to the priorities and objectives of our strategic plan. Now, why that's so important, and what it caused a little bit of a distinction in terms of a traditional approach, was it gives us fundamentally a priority up front. This has an extremely beneficial byproduct for us, whereas in the past we might send somebody or have somebody participate in training and education that was geared towards the outcome of a certificate or the outcome of a diploma. What our learners do now is they go in with objectives laid out in front of them, saying when you go and learn about a given subject or a given process or a given topic, we expect you to come back and perform supporting our strategic plan in this regard. It adds impetus to the learning, it adds a purposeful outcome for the learners, and it allows us to then map that to their experience-based learning that takes place in the performance of their job. So I think the start point for our measurement is if we, in fact, know that we want to achieve some specific outcomes from our strategic plan, we ought to be able to be more efficient and more effective in doing so by investing in a learning technique or a learning method that's tied directly to that objective. So that's really our measurement. It isn't just about how many people graduated. That's not important to us in the long run, in so much as it is important to be able to achieve our business outcomes in an efficient and effective way.
All right. I want to move on to a kind of slightly different topic, the idea of understanding competitors' L&D strategies, something we were calling the industry's blind spot. So can you guys talk about the potential benefits and drawbacks of making an effort to learn about competitors' learning and training practices? Blake, I'd like to start with you on this one because in your role you come in contact with many L&D departments at lots of companies. So is this something you're seeing?
That's a great question, and I've been puzzling over that one because to Patrick's point, I mean, where I see companies focus on is what are their needs in alignment with their strategic plans and their business plans and so forth. So I sense there's not this great need to reach out and look at what other competitors are perhaps doing. Saying that, what I do see a lot of sort of cross-pollination is that training and learning and development departments are bringing in subject matter experts that have worked with a variety of other companies, and they're, you know, I was at one just the other day for a big telco where the company that I'm doing some work for brought in a learning and development expert from a large telco who had done a tremendous job turning around their company, you know, increasing engagement and employee satisfaction and so forth. So they're bringing in subject matter experts from outside to hear their stories and determine whether they can adapt some of those best practices for their own use internally. But I don't see a great fear amongst organizations that, oh boy, we don't know what our competitor is doing in terms of training and learning. There's probably a greater fear that we don't know, or there's probably a greater focus on where are they going within the market and are they developing a competitive advantage. But I don't think they've really linked this to training and learning.
So Patrick, you're working from an interesting standpoint here as being part of a government organization. I know that the government already has in place things like a consortium for chief learning officers to sort of discuss best practices and meet together. But how is the Army aware of what others are doing in this space?
I think, Jeff, I got a little bit different twist on this. And as you can imagine, in a traditional sense, competitors are not something that, from my perspective or from a government perspective, you're really wrestling with, or that we wrestle with. When you're talking about organizations, we very aggressively use our brethren, so to speak, in the government to learn from one another, to share best practices, to leverage enterprise solutions so that we can share that with each other and kind of get there together. We're not competing against each other in so much as we're trying to keep each other abreast of what is working and what's not, and that way get there as a team. So it's not your traditional competitor approach to your question. I will posit it another way, though. What I think we wrestle with a lot, and I'm not saying we are the only organizations that do so, is when you're looking at the focus of learning, a competitor, for lack of a better term, is the other avenues that are available to individuals to learn from. And I'll give you an example. A competitor, to me, is more in line with if an individual is able to access a social media tool and access that more fluidly and easily and learn within the context of that tool, in my definition that I gave you earlier, in other words, their cognitive understanding of the behavior, and we are behind the power curve, so to speak, on leveraging that technology, what you will find is our population will migrate to it. And so you've seen all the debates about whether to use social media or not in the workplace and things of that nature. I contend that the competition is out there in terms of the technology that's available, and the real rigor is making sure we're leveraging that technology at a pace fast enough to handle the generations that we have coming into our workforce. It is somewhat ludicrous to think that we're going to bring a millennial in and have them inundated with some of the 10, 15-year-old technologies in terms of knowledge sharing and wonder why they don't want to do so. So the competitor really isn't, for us, another organization, so to speak, in so much as it is the trends out there that we have to constantly keep our ear to the ground on and constantly work at leveraging so that we're not ostracizing selected elements of our workforce because they know a faster, better way of doing something.
Beth, I want to go to you next. You're in healthcare, which is a very exciting industry right now with many new movers and shakers coming in. So I want to ask, do you find it important or even necessary to keep abreast of the learning and training practices at your competitors?
It's very important for us, mainly to retain and grow our talent, to keep an eye on our competitors' L&D strategies. Our competitors may be the healthcare organizations we're serving, or some of these other corporate vendors that we're up against. And we keep a close eye on what they're doing to grow and retain their talent. we've seen some benefits to doing that, which is, we can, by keeping an eye on their strategies, we actually elevate our performance as an L&D organization or as L&D professionals. And we also can hopefully stay ahead of the game or learn from their mistakes and also some of their successes by retaining the talent that we have or acquiring new talent and growing some new ones. Some drawbacks, I would say, of doing that could be being distracted by some of the trends that we see as in the industry, such as MOOCs or gamification. I think those have their place, but if we're not diligent in first analyzing the situation and the overall goal or overall business objectives we're trying to achieve through our L&D strategies, we may become distracted by these trends or the newest thing in the market for sharing knowledge. So we got to keep our eye and always remember that we need to focus on the business objective first.
All right, thanks, Beth. So I wanted to end today by talking about the future of the Learning and Development Department. There have been advancements in technology, and companies appear willing to spend more money on learning and training programs. So what do you all see as the future of the L&D department? Patrick, I'd like to start with you. In the benchmarking report, you were quoted as saying that in our ever-changing world, L&D's role now and into the future will be to arm our employees, or learners, with the ability to learn on the fly from a toolbox of learning solutions. So can you talk about that toolbox metaphor and sort of how it applies to the future of L&D?
Yeah, Jeff, you've heard me use that term about a toolbox as opposed to a single tool, because at the end of the day, we have found ourselves faced with a situation that technology is not the first question that we ask, and I think it's related to what Beth mentioned, and that is, what are you trying to solve? What's the process, the learning process that you're trying to address, and then assessing what technologies might meet that need, and of course all the rigor that they're in terms of cost and in terms of supportability and sustainability of that technology, so that you're not out on a limb, so to speak, that gets cut off. But first comes the process. What learning process are you trying to address? And then picking out of your toolbox the technology or technologies that work best for that particular situation, based on the environment, based on what you're trying to achieve, etc. And there's an array of them, whether you're talking some social media type approach, whether you're talking the simulations or stimulations in the gaming and gamification, as well as apps, whatever the case might be. Leverage what's needed to meet the process, not the other way around. Because if you go with the technology first, what you're going to do is birth a bunch of learning processes to feed the technology, as opposed to the technology answering the question. I will, in closing on this particular topic, however, note that as you're pursuing the technology, at least in our experience, the one thing the study done thus far did not address, that I think is worthy of looking at as it relates to technology, is the cultural shift therein. Because you've got many layers of different generations in the workforce, all who have come up in a different vein, if you will, in respects to what technology was or was not available. That has huge cultural implications in terms of what you do use out of your toolbox, because even though a mobile app might work for a younger set of workers, it won't work for older or those who are in positions whereby the mobile app becomes a distraction. So the cultural issue of how do you leverage this technology, and how do you affect a cultural change that opens Pandora's box, if you will, in terms of how to use it, as opposed to force-feeding it down everybody's throat, is a huge challenge, and quite frankly, for us, probably the major challenge, because at the end of the day, it's the people that are going to change what we use and how we use it, not the technology in and of itself.
Yeah, definitely. That's an exciting way to think about it, Patrick. Being an intermediary that understands the variety of needs across a variety of learning styles and generations. So, Beth, I'm wondering your perspective on this. You're training similar, kind of widely disparate groups to Patrick on a great amount of topics, job groups, ages. So, what do you see as the future of the L&D department?
This is exciting, isn't it? For a future of L&D, I think that our may just work ourselves out of a job, really, because the L&D department is now tasked with working and embedding learning into the organization, taking it out of the L&D department and moving it back into a function of the organizations themselves. So, we may be, I actually do think we'll always have a place, but our job is going to change. Our objectives are going to change as an L&D organization. I think what we're going to have to figure out in the near future is to find a way to make knowledge more accessible at the right time, at the right place. Our younger generations, and even we're finding it spans across all generations, that our people want the knowledge. There's no need to learn a skill nowadays. You have YouTube. You can go out and figure out how to fix that part on your car. It's always at the fingertip. You don't have to remember how to do that thing. You want to figure out who was the 22nd president of the United States. You go to Google and you find that out. That is what we're finding our employees, our workforce, is expecting from us. They want that knowledge at their fingertips when they need it, as they need it. So that's really what we have to figure out. We have to figure out how to measure that. We need to find ways to connect people and make the most out of the networks that these people have and that we have in our workplace. And then our job is really going to have to facilitate that informal learning and knowledge sharing across the organization. So, I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting to see what the future holds, see what the L&D department role is going to be as that learning responsibility starts to work its way down into the organizations and the roles of people themselves.
And Blake, how about you? What do you see as the future of the L&D department?
Well, Beth and Patrick are a hard act to follow. I'm not sure I can add too much to that. I agree with both their perspectives, but maybe I'll just add a little bit of additional context. I think, what I hear from Beth's response is that, and I agree, that what we're seeing is that content has diminishing value because everybody has access to it. So what does that mean for learning? Well, that means that the real value in learning is around context. So we've got tons of content, but they need the context, and that context, comes from experience, know-how, expertise, and that really is going to be the focus of learning in the future. So content will be left up to the individuals to get, but where I guess organizations or learning and development departments will focus on is context, creating that challenge, that problem that allows students to apply the content to actually solve something meaningful.
All right, guys, thanks so much for such great conversation today. I want to thank our three wonderful panelists, Patrick Conway, Chief Knowledge Officer at the U.S. Army's Combined Arms Support Command, Beth Gates, Director of Global Training at Philips Healthcare, and Blake Melnick, Chief Knowledge Officer at the Knowledge Management Institute of Canada, for taking part in this roundtable. If you'd like additional articles, videos, webinars, white papers, and podcasts on corporate learning, please visit corporatelearningnetwork.com. And for more information on the upcoming event I mentioned at the beginning, Corporate Learning Week West, you can download a preliminary agenda by visiting clnweekwest.com. Thanks for watching.